The story of Vikir van Baskerville paints a picture of a young man who faced an unending series of challenges and obstacles. Being born as a bastard child to a lowly concubine deprived him of the privilege and recognition that usually came with a prestigious surname. Vikir had to work twice as hard as his half-brothers to earn his rightful place in the family, enduring hardships and struggles every step of the way. Despite his tireless efforts, Vikir's fortunes took a turn for the worse, and he found himself embroiled in a dark and dangerous world of espionage, assassination, and smuggling, all in the name of protecting and providing for his family. He went to great lengths, risking his life and crossing numerous lines, to ensure the well-being of his loved ones. Yet, despite his valiant efforts, fate was not kind to Vikir. He was accused of being a spy for the demon tribe, a charge that was unjust and unfounded, but one that would seal his fate nonetheless. In the end, he was executed, his life snuffed out in a cruel and unfair manner. But even in death, Vikir could not let go of his fervent desire to live. His thoughts lingered on the hope of a second chance, a new beginning that would allow him to start over and live life to the fullest once more. "I want to live," he thought with a fierce determination. Gradually, Vikir's eyes fluttered open, his mind shrouded in confusion and disorientation. He felt an overwhelming weakness coursing through his body, as if all his mana and strength had been drained away. In a barely audible voice, he muttered to himself, "Where am I?" As he surveyed his surroundings, in a vast and opulent chamber, the sounds of infants' cries filled the air, their wails overlapping and echoing off the walls. These were the offspring of the formidable Baskerville family, a lineage of unyielding swordsmen renowned for their fierce temperament and dedication to the art of combat. A chilling realization dawned upon him. He found himself in a place that surpassed any hell he had ever known before, the dreaded Baskerville family home. This was where he had spent 30 long years of his previous life as a hunting dog. Soon after, Marquis Hugo Baskerville, the family's patriarch, surveyed the newborns with a cold and dispassionate eye, his initial assessment of them brusque and unfeeling. "They don't appear to be worth much," he observed, his words carrying an undertone of disappointment and disdain. Yet, amidst the cacophony of infant cries, something caught his attention. In the midst of the clamor, one cradle remained silent and motionless. It belonged to Vikir van Baskerville, an illegitimate child who had no right to be there, unlike his legitimate half-brothers who were several months older. As Hugo's gaze remained fixed on Vikir, a trace of tenderness entered his previously impassive face. It wasn't that he saw anything particularly remarkable about the child. In fact, he regarded Vikir as little more than a piece of refuse. Yet, in a room filled with howling, wriggling infants, the stillness of Vikir's cradle held a certain allure. With a sense of purpose, Hugo issued an order to the nannies who stood behind him. "Transport the children to the Cradle of Swords," he instructed. It was a trial that all Baskerville offspring underwent, beginning from the moment of their birth until the day they perished. The initial trial had just commenced, and it would continue until the very end. The Cradle of Swords, a unique ritual of the Baskervilles, was a grueling rite of passage that started from the instant of a child's birth. Innumerable knives were arranged in a circular pattern, forming a lethal maze that awaited the newborns. Each child was placed at the center of the labyrinth, free to wander among the blades, where even the slightest mistake could lead to severe harm or death. It was a journey to the Styx River. The Styx River is a legendary river that turns the bodies of children into iron. However, there is a limit to how many children it can affect. The moment they soak themselves in the river over a wall made of swords. It was a rite of passage that determined the fittest and the strongest among them. The competition was fierce and unforgiving, as the babies struggled to reach the river before time ran out. The older babies had a clear advantage, their larger size and more developed motor skills allowing them to navigate the maze with greater ease. But Vikir, the illegitimate child, was at a clear disadvantage. After learning that Vikir has apparently regressed to infancy, he is overcome with the desire for revenge. Unfortunately, with the limitations of a newborn body, he is unable to take any action. However, being placed in the Cradle of Swords presents an excellent opportunity for him to grow stronger. In order to achieve his goals, Vikir knows that he must become more powerful, and he is determined to do whatever it takes to succeed. As Vikir found himself thrust into the center of the cot in the cradle of swords, he couldn't help but wonder if this was the infamous rite of passage that he had heard so much about. Legends, myths, and ghost stories of the Baskerville family had circulated throughout his life, and now, he was living them. He braced himself for what he knew was to come next: escape from the cradle and a long soak in the river to gain an advantage over his brothers. With his small, delicate hands, Vikir twisted the blade and pressed it against his skin. He winced as the burning pain spread throughout his body, but he was no stranger to it. After all, he had lived a past life as a hunting dog, enduring much worse for decades. The cuts inflicted by the swords were nothing compared to the hundreds of wounds he had received in the past. For the Baskerville family, it was a long-standing tradition to hold blades that symbolized the challenges of the future from the very first birthday. And Vikir was not exempt from this custom. He gritted his teeth and pushed through the blade with all his might. Soon enough, he reached the holy land of Baskerville, where the Styx River flowed through the swamp, allowing the water from the Styx River to seep into his wounds. And without hesitation, Vikir threw himself into the river with a splash, enduring the painful sensation as the boiling water seeped into his countless sword cuts. He knew that the deeper the cut, the better it would allow the water to enter his body. But he knew that enduring this pain was necessary, for the water from the Styx River would seep into his wounds, tears, and bursting cuts, changing his body in a little while. And indeed, soon after, his body began to change as the water permeated his bones and intestines. The urgent voices from above echoed with increasing panic, urging Vikir to leave the river before it was too late. Despite the frenzied warnings, Vikir clung determinedly to a stone, impervious to even the commanding voice of Hugo Baskerville. At last, Vikir emerged from the river, gasping for air and coughing up water. He gratefully filled his lungs with the fresh, crisp air as Hugo Baskerville caught sight of him and let out a jovial laugh. As Hugo inquired about the young boy's name, he turned to the head butler, who revealed that the child was named Vikir van Baskerville. Hugo was surprised to learn that the boy already had teeth, leading him to underestimate him. However, in that very moment, he noticed a glimmer of potential in Vikir that he had not seen before. Hugo was struck with a newfound sense of determination, knowing that the young boy had what it took to become a great warrior. Without hesitation, he decided to welcome Vikir into the esteemed Baskerville family. Soon after that, the infant Vikir lay his tiny body, still unable to fully control its movements. He reflected on the circumstances before returning. At age 8, for the first time, he felt mana. In the outside world, he could be called a genius, but in the Baskervilles, he was just an ordinary person. By the age of 15, Vikir had achieved a level of mastery over his mana, such that a faint aura surrounded his sword when he wielded it. And by 20, he was being put to use by the clan for tasks such as assassination, intelligence gathering, and subjugation of barbarians. But it was in his mid-20s that Vikir truly began to distinguish himself. He lived and fought with a ferocity that surpassed even his peers, achieving a level of swordsmanship that would take others decades to reach. However, despite his prowess, Vikir's status as an illegitimate child meant there was a limit to how far he could rise within the clan. And when the gate to the demon realm opened and demons began to invade, Vikir was forced to endure an era of destruction and gain practical experience through killing monsters. Finally, after years of struggle, the war against the demons was won and the human empire emerged victorious. But for Vikir, his loyalty to the Baskervilles proved to be his undoing. False accusations were leveled against him, accusing him of siding with the demons. And so, at the age of 40, Vikir met his end on the guillotine, a faithful hunting dog betrayed by those he had served all his life. Soon after, strange thing happened. The nanny who had just left returned to Vikir's cradle, muttering something about a madam. The nanny then produced a large box from her bosom and placed it in his bed before quickly leaving again. As he looked at the box in silence, he suddenly heard a hissing sound. Something was squeezing the box, and two black triangular heads popped out. Vikir's heart raced as he realized that they belonged to a pair of deadly mambas. For Vikir, this had never been a concern. He had believed himself to be immune to such fate, believing it to be the work of malicious enemies or simple bad luck. But as he found himself standing amidst a nursery targeted by an assassin, he realized that his own life could be in peril. It was clear that the attack had come from within the family, an unsettling realization that left Vikir on edge. Two venomous mambas slithered towards him, their bloody jaws already slick with the blood of their previous victims. Vikir knew that if he did not act quickly, the children in the nursery would be slaughtered. Vikir then caught one viper in each hand, gripping them firmly near the nape of their necks. The two vipers stiffened in fear, their bodies sensing the presence of a higher predator. They froze under the pressure of Vikir's man-infused hands, before succumbing to the twisting force that broke their necks with a resounding crack. The vipers opened their mouths wide, their eyes bulging and tongues lolling out. Their broken bodies trembled, releasing dung and urine, and poisonous poison dripped from their fangs. The following day, at the loud scream of the first nanny who arrived at work, the family guards swiftly gathered in the nursery room. There, holding two broken-necked vipers with a sleeping smile on his face, was Vikir. The guardian knights were astonished to see the red and black mountain poisonous mamba in the nursery, even with its fangs removed. The discovery of such a monster in the children's room was a great tragedy indeed. Within moments, news of the incident reached Hugo, who hastened back to the parenting department. The nannies who had been on night shift were tortured and executed, and strict surveillance was established in the nursery. Despite the efforts made to uncover the culprit who had released the deadly poison, no one was able to find anything except for one individual. A young hound, unable to speak, had seen through the truth. Vikir van Baskerville, a legendary child who had swum in the Styx River longer than any other, and had slipped through the cradle of swords in record time. Vikir sat silently in his cradle, waiting for the perfect moment. A moment to pay off his debt, a time for revenge. With that, 8 years have passed. Vikir van Baskerville was 8 years old, and like the children of the Baskervilles, he was taking various classes. During today's lesson, the tutor enlightened his students on the art of swordsmanship and its various levels. He explained that irrespective of one's skill level, every swordsman starts as a sword beginner, lacking the knowledge of how to infuse mana into a sword. Moving up the ladder, a sword expert knows how to channel mana into the tip of their sword, but the resulting aura is weak and fragile. A sword graduator can manifest an aura dense enough to resemble a liquid, while a sword master possesses the ability to solidify their aura and shape it at will. The tutor then said Hugo, the supreme member of the Baskerville family, is a sword master. Everyone is surprised after hearing that. Of course, this is a fact that Vikir already knew. As the class progressed, Vikir was lost in thought, pondering over the urgent need to regain the power he had lost before his regression, just in time for the upcoming coming-of-age ceremony. Despite being only 8 years old, Vikir had already reached the advanced level of sword expert, a feat unknown to anyone in the family. In his past life, he had barely achieved this level when he was 20, but before his rebirth, he had risen to an even higher level of expertise. Lost in his own thoughts, Vikir couldn't help but wonder how many more years it would take him to defeat Hugo. Throughout the class, the tutor had his eyes fixed on Vikir, impressed by his exceptional talent. To say that Vikir was gifted would be an understatement. His talent was almost violent in its overwhelming force. Vikir's legendary feat of surviving for over 7 minutes in the river Styx as a mere 100-day-old child had already made him a legend in the Baskerville family. However, it wasn't just his physical prowess that was remarkable. His mind was also incredibly sharp, surpassing all his peers in the family. Truly a once-in-a-100-year talent, the patriarch would undoubtedly be overjoyed to hear of Vikir's progress. The tutor made a mental note to report all this to Hugo. After class, the children were going back to their rooms all over the castle. However, Vikir's progress was impeded by a group of 3 9-year-olds who blocked his path. They taunted him, calling him garbage van, and pushed him into a corner. To add insult to injury, one of the children proceeded to tell Vikir that he had heard some strange rumors about him. Supposedly, Vikir had submerged himself in the river Styx for a full 7 minutes, and had even strangled 2 vipers in their cradle. The other two children chimed in agreement. Vikir couldn't believe that he was being subjected to this kind of childish behavior. He wondered if this was just a simple quarrel between 9-year-olds. After all, the Baskervilles placed great importance on talent and skill, and such petty squabbles were unlikely to persist as they grew older. However, the reason why Vikir was paying close attention to the triplets in front of him was another. Because they are Hugo Baskerville's triplets. In 10 more years, they will grow into quite troublesome enemies. In fact, before returning, there are 3 hunting dogs who relentlessly pursued Vikir, who escaped through the siege. These guys have been tormenting Vikir a lot since he was a kid. It might be a good idea to put them in their place now, he thought. Soon one of them put out his blade and told Vikir, he heard that if anyone stay in the Styx River for long, their body becomes like steel, which means Vikir can't be injured by blades. Eldest brother gave a signal to his youngest brother, who was next to him. Youngest brother grinned when he saw the signal. He nodded his head, went behind Vikir, and covered his nose and mouth with both of his hands. As the youngest brother sneered at Vikir, taunting him about his rumored feat of holding his breath in the Styx River for 7 minutes. He arrogantly bet that he would eat his hat if Vikir could endure for even 3 minutes. However, much to their surprise, after 10 long minutes, Vikir still stood there without breathing, proving them wrong. The room fell silent, and even the triplets who had started the bullying were now drenched in cold sweat, realizing their mistake. All this time, Vikir had been staring at the triplets, without blinking his eyes nor changing his composure. There was nothing but grave silence. Eldest brother then told youngest to let him go. Just as youngest brother was about to take his hands off, he started screaming. Vikir spat out a finger from his mouth. Seeing Vikir smiling bashfully with a lot of thick blood on his lips, the faces of the triplets turned pale in an instant. Both of them turned their heads, their attention drawn to youngest, who lifted his palm and sniffled. The youngest triplet had been bitten, and it was his finger that was now missing. The triplets started to get flustered. Although seeing blood was a common occurrence in the children of Baskerville, it was a different story when it came to flesh being ripped off, along with broken bone fragments. The eldest brother comforted the youngest, telling him to calm down, and suggested going to the priest to have the finger reattached. Just as the eldest reached out to open the door, Vikir blocked their path and asked who gave them permission to leave. The distorted expression on Vikir's face didn't last long. The eldest brother then mustered up his courage and rushed towards Vikir with a dagger in his hand. However, despite the dagger properly piercing into Vikir's dress, the eldest brother's blade failed to draw a single drop of blood. After seeing that, he had a blank expression on his face. Vikir's body had reached a level of indestructibility at the young age of 8, thanks to the protection of the Styx. He caught hold of the eldest brother's hand and informed them that in Baskerville, age didn't matter as long as one had strength and talent. Now, Vikir wanted to play with them. With a swift movement, Vikir's fist connected with his eldest brother's face, causing a sickening crunch as his nose, bones, and teeth shattered under the force. His brother fell to the floor, writhing in pain and clutching his face. The other brother stood frozen, a blank expression on his face until he saw Vikir's incoming kick and instinctively turned his chin, trying to protect himself. The room was filled with the sounds of their screams, groans, and cries, each brother expressing their agony in a unique way. Vikir slithered in front of the door, a dark shadow casting over the 3 trembling twins who were clutching their faces, jaws, and fingers. "Don't be scared," he said in a low, menacing voice. "You'll get better in no time once you're treated. But I won't let you leave this room. You'll have to live with the discomfort of your own bodies at this rate." As the triplets shook with fear, a dagger was thrown in front of them, landing with a sharp clang on the ground. "There is only one brother who can get out of this room alive," Vikir declared, his patience wearing thin as he told them to decide quickly. Time was running out for them. In unison, the triplets' eyes locked onto the dagger glinting in the center of the room, and as if on cue, their bodies began to shake and split from the inside out. The transformation was quick and violent, each brother contorting and writhing in agony as their forms shifted and twisted until they were no longer recognizable as human. The once identical triplets were now 3 completely different creatures, each with their own unique abilities and strengths. The room was silent as the newly transformed beings surveyed their surroundings, knowing that only one of them would be able to leave this place alive. As the camera pans, we find ourselves in the presence of Hugo Les Baskerville, the master of the Baskerville family. A man of iron will and a skilled swordsman, he was also counted amongst the 7 pillars of the empire. He was deep in conversation with John Barrymore, the head butler of the Baskerville household, who had loyally served the family for 4 generations. John had arrived to present his first report of the day, one that concerned the recent bloodshed within the Morgue family, known for their mastery of magic and counted among the 7 noble families of the region. The Baskerville family had been locked in a territorial dispute with the Morgues over the ruby mine situated at the edge of their respective estates. The mine, located in the Red All Mountains, was the subject of much contention and had become a flashpoint between the 2 families. John Barrymore had come to update Hugo on the latest developments in the matter. As John concluded his report, Hugo listened attentively, his expression inscrutable. He mulled over the information for a moment before finally speaking up. "We will have an opportunity to discuss this problem soon," he said, referring to the dispute with the Morgues. "Someone from their side will be coming to visit us." He then turned to John and inquired, "Is there anything else to report?" To which John replied that Vikir had secured the first place in the midterm infantile evaluation. Hugo's stoic expression gave way to a look of surprise at this news. Seizing the opportunity to ask a question that had been on his mind, Hugo inquired, "When is the practical test for the children who entered the infant castle?" John informed him that the test was set to begin in just 5 days, and that most of the guardian knights of the young masters had already left on business trips to prepare, leaving the infant castle nearly empty. As John finished his previous report, his expression suddenly changed to one of excitement. He had one more matter to inform Hugo about, concerning the juvenile fortress. "There has recently been a big fight amongst the young masters," he revealed, his voice brimming with energy. At the mention of a fight, Hugo's previously impassive expression shifted completely. "How many died?" he asked, his voice low. John quickly reassured him. "No one has died, but all of the young masters suffered injuries. Their teeth were damaged, young Master Viro's jawbone was dented, and young Master Laurel lost the index finger of his right hand." He added that all of them had since been treated and were now in good health. Hugo took a deep breath and leaned back in his chair, reassured by the news that no one had died in the fight. As he turned over the reports on the triplets, he murmured to himself, "They're so close to each other, there's no way they would have fought each other, right?" John concurred. "You're right, sir. They were in conflict with another young master." Then, John dropped a bombshell. "The person who wounded the 3 young masters is the 8-year-old young master, Master Vikir. The one with the highest scores on the written exam." At those words, Hugo's eyes lit up with interest once again. Shortly after, Vikir van Baskerville, who was now 8 years old, was summoned by the Patriarch. As soon as Hugo laid eyes on him, he commented, "You've grown a lot while I haven't seen you," which seemed to surprise Vikir. His typically sharp voice sounded dull today. Hugo then brought up the topic of the recent fight, mentioning that he had heard that Vikir had disabled the 9-year-old triplets in his senior class. Vikir responded calmly, stating that if Hugo was referring to those brothers, he believed they had received proper medical treatment since then. Hugo clarified that he was not referring to physical disabilities, but rather the disability of the heart. He explained that since that day, the triplets had been eating separately, and didn't even speak to each other anymore. Their once decent combination technique had been completely torn apart due to the fight. Hugo then questioned Vikir's actions and asked if he thought it was wrong. Vikir responded with the belief that the stronger person couldn't be wrong. Hugo then mentioned that Vikir's brothers had already forgiven him, and yet Vikir still didn't feel an ounce of guilt. As Vikir basked in his happiness, a memory from his past life suddenly resurfaced. He vividly recalled the time when Hugo was visited by the youngest daughter of a family that had suffered at the hands of the ruthless Baskerville clan. Despite the many years that had passed, the woman had become a nun and, in a heartfelt moment, she had forgiven Hugo and offered a mass. Vikir's curiosity was piqued, and he knew how Hugo had responded to such a gracious act. However, the memory proved bittersweet as Hugo's response was far from what everyone had hoped for. He had callously declared that, "I believe forgiveness is just an excuse made by the weak who cannot seek revenge due to their lack of strength." As the words of Vikir's callous response echoed in the air, Hugo was consumed with a sense of joy, relishing in his belief that only the strong could reign supreme and that weakness was nothing but a sin. For Vikir, this was a familiar sentiment, having grown up with the family motto ingrained in his mind. Following this exchange, Hugo instructed John to allow Vikir to take whatever snack he desired from the food storage, provided it was something he could carry on his own. With a bright smile, Vikir requested chocolate and thanked the patriarch for his generosity. As Vikir turned to leave, Hugo reminded him to do well on the interim evaluation and not to lose to the direct descendants, underscoring the competitive nature of the family. In the next scene, John led Vikir to the food storage, where he proudly displayed the infamous chocolate enjoyed by the Gurmans of the Morg clan. He explained to Vikir that the chocolate was of the highest quality, obtained with great difficulty. However, Vikir surprised John when he expressed that he did not want anything processed and needed the cacao beans with a rich aroma. Without hesitation, John gave the beans to Vikir, explaining that they were known for their rich aroma and that with just one bean, Vikir could produce 100 liters of chocolate. John couldn't help but wonder at Vikir's passion for chocolate, but also praised his brilliance in finding a way to have as much chocolate as he desired while still adhering to the patriarch's restrictions. But Vikir did not want the chocolate to eat it. The bloody beans would be used during the practical exam within 5 days. On this day, a huge catastrophe would occur that has never happened at the Baskerville clan before. In this world, the legendary family known as the Baskerville family, but many refer to them as the Berserker family due to their extreme upbringing. The children from this family undergo a rigorous education from a very young age. As soon as they are able to take their first steps, they are put to the test with a grueling run up a steep mountain to test their basic stamina. They are not allowed to lie down or rest except during allocated times. When it's time for sleep, the young Baskervilles are required to sleep alongside a monster corpse to acclimate to tough environments. Once this period of training ends, at the age of 8, the young hounds begin their deadly evaluation. It is this intense and brutal upbringing that earned the Baskerville family their infamous moniker as the Berserker family. Today marks the practical evaluation for the survival exam, and the young hounds have gathered at the Noir Mountain, located on the outskirts of the territory filled with monsters. The instructor, known as Shadow Dog, explains that the basic contents of the evaluation are simple. The young hounds need to survive for a month in this treacherous environment, where they will have to hunt large and strong monsters while being mindful of 2 conditions: survival and success. The point system for the evaluation is as follows: if they successfully survive, they earn 10 points. If they survive without becoming disabled, they earn 30 points. If they fail but still manage to survive, they earn 50 points. If they survive after defeating a monster, they earn 70 points. If they fulfill all the above conditions, they receive 90 points. Furthermore, additional points will be given if they steal the badge given to them all from someone else. However, if they fail to survive, they will receive 0 points. It's important to note that there are no 100 points. The instructor emphasized the importance of recalling Sir Hugo's lesson that a swordsman's downfall is arrogance. Additionally, he advised the students to remain within the designated area, as Noir Mountain is a restricted region with many unexplored areas. It is advisable for them to stay within the zone where they have already triumphed over the monsters. During the examination, the Shadow Dogs, also known as Guardian Knights, will be covertly observing and grading the students. As the instructor was outlining the regulations, a few of the contenders caught sight of Vikir and whispered amongst themselves, remarking, "Isn't he the one who endured 7 minutes in the Styx River? And didn't he allegedly vanquish 2 venomous serpents inside the cradle?" Furthermore, they had heard that Vikir had scored a perfect grade on the written exam, and they were now curious to see if he would demonstrate similar expertise in the practical aspect of the test. Meanwhile, The triplet brothers seemed to be avoiding Vikir, seemingly afraid of him. As soon as the instructor rang the handbell, the participants dispersed in all directions, each seeking to secure a favorable position for themselves. Meanwhile, the triplet brothers chose to work independently, declining to collaborate with one another. At the same time, the instructor reminded everyone that this examination did not condone killing other participants. While not strictly forbidden, it was highly discouraged and would result in a point deduction. Consequently, everyone strived to avoid harming others needlessly. The shadow dogs were also doing their utmost to minimize any potential casualties. As Vikir ventured closer to the restricted area, a shadow dog began tailing him, intrigued by where the young master was headed. The shadow dog had heard rumors of Vikir's prodigious talents, and was eager to witness his skills firsthand. Eventually, Vikir arrived at a location near a sizable tree, where he noted that the soil appeared to be sufficiently soft. Having made his decision on where to stay for the time being, Vikir took a moment to rest and unwind, all while being observed by the shadow dog. The shadow dog couldn't help but wonder why Vikir had decided to take a break at this juncture. As the other participants engaged in a heated battle, Vikir went about his business of gathering wood, digging the ground, and eventually settling down for a nap. The shadow dog observed all of this and began to question the validity of the rumors surrounding Vikir's supposed genius-level intellect. If all he was going to do was hide, then there was little point in continuing to watch him. So, the shadow dog departed the area, unaware that Vikir had been patiently waiting for this very moment. As Vikir watched the shadow dog disappear into the distance, he couldn't help but feel a sense of nostalgia wash over him. Campaigning outside always reminded him of the old days. As he reminisced, his mind drifted back to a conversation he once had with one of his subordinates about using cacao beans to reduce the fishy smell of fish. According to the subordinate, bloody beans with a high concentration of cacao were the best for this purpose. Intrigued, Vikir decided to give it a try and put his cacao beans to the fire. As he watched the beans roast and crackle in the flames, Vikir mused to himself about how he had finally gotten rid of the one interfering with his plans. With everything he needed now prepared, he knew it was time to start his hunt in earnest. A few days later, Vikir found himself wandering around inside the restricted area. He couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and trepidation as he realized that from this point onwards, he was entering uncharted territory. However, he couldn't help but chuckle to himself as he remembered how he used to casually roam around this place during his scouting days in his previous life. As he walked, Vikir suddenly caught a whiff of something burning. It smelled like burned tree roots, and he knew that the creature he was hunting had to be nearby. Soon enough, he spotted a burning stool, the telltale sign of a monster's presence. Back in his scouting days, Vikir had found these droppings to be annoying, but now he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. He knew exactly what kind of monster he was dealing with: a hellhound. The hellhound is a fearsome monster with a risk rating of B+ and a size of 3 meters. It was first discovered on the second ridge of the Le Rouge et Le Noir mountain. As its name suggests, it is a dog from hell and is known for bringing horrific disasters to those who cross its path. Its bite is fatal, and there is no known cure for its venom. One of the most terrifying features of the hellhound is the sulfurous flames that erupt from its mouth and eyes. These flames are highly gaseous and can easily trigger sparks. Any living thing used as firewood will burn uncontrollably until it is completely consumed. Facing this monster is not for the faint-hearted, and it takes a skilled hunter like Vikir to track and take it down. In his previous life, Vikir had struggled to defeat even one hellhound when he was just 18 years old. Now, as an 8-year-old child, it seemed impossible for him to take on a hellhound alone. However, Vikir knew of a way to defeat the creature that even a child could execute. When the battle between Vikir and the hellhound began, he quickly identified the hound's weaknesses. Firstly, hellhounds could only move in straight lines, making it difficult for them to change direction suddenly. Secondly, despite being lookout monsters, they could not cross even shallow water. Vikir seized this opportunity and threw water on the ground, slowing the hellhound down and exposing its weakness. As the hound charged towards him, its mouth wide open to attack, Vikir quickly threw something into its mouth. It turned out to be the bloody bean, a chocolate-making ingredient that could produce 100 liters of chocolate with just one bean. Vikir knew that chocolate was toxic to canines, and the bloody bean was no exception. The hellhound fell to the ground, unable to withstand the deadly effects of the bean. Vikir declared that even the hound of hell could not withstand the chocolate. Vikir unsheathed his sword, knowing that his best chance to defeat the hellhound was to target its weak spot. He assessed the situation, understanding that the hound's hard ribs would protect its vital organs, including its stomach and heart. Instead, he set his sights on the kidney, where there were no ribs to shield it. With precision and skill, Vikir launched a fierce attack on the hellhound's kidney, ultimately killing the creature. As he stood over the beast's lifeless body, a strange aura emitted from it, a powerful energy known as XP or karma that could accumulate in the body and make it stronger. Vikir absorbed the XP, feeling a newfound sense of strength and agility. He marveled at how his sword now felt lighter than before. With every victory, Vikir was inching closer to his former self before his regression. He couldn't help but wonder what kind of expression Hugo would make upon seeing that an 8-year-old had slain a monster with a risk rating of B+. As Vikir contemplated his impressive victory over the hellhound, he realized that he had likely secured his position as the top scorer in the practical test. He had already decided what reward he's gonna ask for, an enormous reward he would have never dreamed of asking for in his past life. He will take that, the value of which no one in this era really knows, except himself. As he moved to claim the head of the defeated hellhound, Vikir noticed a pack of other hounds closing in, no doubt seeking revenge for their fallen comrade. Without hesitation, he unsheathed his sword and sliced off one of their heads in a single swift motion. He had never intended to stop at just one, and he knew that he still had plenty of beans left to take on the rest. With his confidence renewed, Vikir called out to the remaining hellhounds, daring them to come at him. He knew that he had the bloody beans on his side. Just as the remaining hellhounds were about to launch their attack, Vikir noticed that they suddenly seemed scared and hesitant. He was taken aback, wondering how a mere 8-year-old's bloodthirst could instill such fear in them. But he quickly realized that the hellhounds would never submit to their prey, even if it meant certain death. Turning his attention behind him, Vikir was surprised to see a Cerberus standing there. The creature had a risk rating of A+, making it a formidable opponent. Vikir wondered how the Cerberus had ended up in this area and then noticed that it was bleeding profusely, with multiple arrows and other injuries visible on its body. He wondered if someone was trying to hunt it across the mountain in the barbarian tribe territory. As he pondered how the Cerberus had sustained such injuries, Vikir realized that this was his chance. An injured A+ rank monster presented a rare opportunity to boost his score even further. He resolved to kill the Cerberus, no matter the cost. Vikir had been concealing his true powers from the Baskerville household, including the fact that he had attained a high level of swordsmanship and had already mastered the Baskerville's third technique, a level that other members would only achieve upon reaching adulthood. However, in his fight against the injured Cerberus, Vikir unsheathed his sword and launched an attack. Despite his initial confidence, the Cerberus managed to shatter his sword and launch a fierce counterattack, catching Vikir off guard and using its claws to throw him into a nearby tree. After the brutal attack from Cerberus, Vikir found himself injured and momentarily unconscious. As he regained his senses, he felt a sharp pain in his left arm and feared that it had been torn off by the fearsome hound. However, upon closer inspection, he realized that the wound was not as severe as he had initially thought, and it could have been caused by the mystical waters of the river Styx. Despite his injuries, Vikir knew that he couldn't afford to take another hit from Cerberus, and would have to rely on his evasive skills since he had lost his sword. With Cerberus in hot pursuit, Vikir quickly assessed his options and realized that attacking the hound at this point would be impossible. Instead, he decided to retreat and make a run for the iron fence nearby. Though injured, Vikir pushed himself to his limits, knowing that every second counted. As he ran towards the fence, he knew that if he could make it over, he would have a chance to turn the tables on the relentless Cerberus. Soon, he reached the place where he had set the trap. After running a long distance, Vikir took a leap of faith and crossed the trap. Though it was a risky move, it was the only way to stop Cerberus, and Vikir expected that he had made it through the trap he had set. As Vikir caught his breath, he noticed that the ferocious Cerberus had stumbled right into the trap he had set. Though the trap had been specifically designed for hellhounds, it seemed to have worked its magic on the three-headed monster as well. Vikir knew that Cerberus belonged to the same species of canid monsters as the hellhounds, and that the essence of the bloody beam he had spread on the wooden spears acted as a potent poison for them. Despite the poison's effects, the high-ranking demon was still alive, and Vikir knew that he needed to finish the job quickly before it regained its strength. He threw his spear towards the monster, causing it to slow down before collapsing. Vikir counted the creature's steps, and as it took its seventh step, it collapsed and died. He realized that the rumors about the wooden spear he had used were true. It was laced with the venom of the deadly mamba fawn that wouldn't allow the victim to take more than 7 steps after being bitten. Vikir was glad that he had kept it since his younger days, and it had proven to be a lifesaver once again. As he stood there, he could feel the energy of the monster flowing into him, making him stronger and more invincible than ever before. As he looked around, Vikir couldn't help but wonder why Cerberus had been in the area. It was common knowledge that Cerberus were gatekeepers that protected their territories and must have been guarding something nearby. He suspected that it might be a dungeon, a mysterious place known to harbor valuable treasures, and sometimes even powerful monsters use them as their lair. Now that Cerberus was gone, the dungeon was likely empty, and Vikir decided to investigate. He made his way to the location of the dungeon, hoping to find valuable treasure and artifacts that would aid him on his quest. As Vikir stepped into the dungeon, a sense of familiarity washed over him. He remembered being here before, prior to his regression. Despite knowing that the dungeon would be empty in 10 years, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something hidden beneath the rotting surface. He pressed on, his intuition guiding him deeper into the dungeon. As he made his way through the winding corridors, Vikir couldn't help but wonder what kind of treasures lay waiting for him. It wasn't long before he caught sight of something glimmering in the darkness. Veins of ruby minerals crisscrossed throughout the area, leading him to believe that they must be connected to the Red Mountain. His curiosity piqued. Vikir followed the trail of rubies until he stumbled upon a source of light. The glow emanated from the entrance of the dungeon, inviting him in. Once inside, he was greeted by the sight of a magnificent ruby stone, nestled in the heart of the dungeon. The interior was awash with a bright, warm light, the ruby emitting its own radiance. Vikir approached the ruby stone with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, but as he drew closer, his heart sank. A skeleton lay before him, its injuries clearly indicating that the person had been stabbed multiple times. The blood had long since dried, leaving nothing but a grim reminder of the violence that had occurred here. As he inspected the body, Vikir noticed a note clutched in the skeleton's bony hand. He gingerly took it, careful not to disturb the remains any further. The note was written in a shaky hand, the ink faded but still legible. It read, "It doesn't matter what my name is. I'll just call myself Cain. There's no need to dirty this pure white paper with my name. I write this so that future generations do not make the same mistake as I did. This stone chamber has been talked about within the family as a legend. My brother, Abel, and I coincidentally came across this place, and we raided this dungeon which consisted of countless trials. We killed many monsters and arrived at this chamber, to find the final assignment of this place. That assignment tied our feet here for a very long time, 3 years. Upon analyzing the handwriting, Vikir swiftly determined that it belonged to Baskerville, and upon examining the body, he confirmed that it was indeed Baskerville. The final task was to decipher the cryptic message. That says when entering, it's 1, but once inside, it's 2, when leaving, it's 1. As he continued to read the note, Vikir found out Cain and his brother contemplated over the ominous text for what seemed like an eternity. Eventually, they came to a startling realization. They were twin brothers who had once been one in their mother's womb but were separated at birth. In order to claim the treasure in the dungeon, they needed to become one again. That meant only one of them could leave with the treasure. After a fierce battle, he ended up killing his own brother. He was left alone in the stone chamber. But despite this, there was no change. They had gone from 2 to 1, yet he still couldn't take the treasure. He wondered why. He had even killed his own flesh and blood for it. After moments of deep regret, he decided to leave this place and warn anyone brave enough to venture here to leave immediately. There was nothing to gain from this devil's pen that only served to taunt and torment humans. Upon reading the note, he realized that although Cain and Abel had faced countless challenges to get to this point, they had ultimately come away with nothing. However, Vikir didn't have a twin, so the assignment remained the same despite this fact. This meant that Cain and Abel must have misinterpreted the text. As he gazed at the ruby stone, he pondered the cryptic message inscribed upon it. It says when entering, it's 1, but once inside it's 2. When leaving, it's 1. He was certain that no dungeon could not be conquered, and so he set to work interpreting the text. He realized that Cain and Abel had simply been unlucky, as they were hindered by a fixed idea. The solution to the riddle lay within the dungeon itself, a dark passageway leading to a brilliantly lit stone chamber. When he entered through the passageway, he was 1, but as soon as the ruby's light cast a shadow on him, he became 2. The final stage of the stone chamber would open when darkness once again reigned. The answer was shadow. With a fierce determination, Vikir delivered a powerful punch to the ruby stone, causing it to shatter into countless pieces. The destruction of the stone triggered the opening of the door leading to the final reward and the cause of the 2 brothers' demise. It was none other than the relic of Devil's Den, a powerful artifact known only to those with Baskerville blood as Beelzebub. As Vikir beheld the relic, he was struck with shock and disbelief. He had seen an illustration of this very item in a picture book during his previous life. It depicted a gluttonous fly, none other than Beelzebub itself. As Vikir retrieved the blade, a dark aura emanated from it and enveloped his hand. The aura seemed to infuse itself into Vikir's being, and as it did, a blade materialized in his grasp, a weapon forged from the corpses of Devil's holy constellation. Holding Beelzebub in his other hand, Vikir couldn't help but feel grateful for his good fortune. With the power of the newly acquired blade, he was eager to discover just how much stronger he would become in this life. The anticipation of what lay ahead filled him with excitement. After obtaining Beelzebub, Vikir felt content that he had nothing else to achieve and began to head back. However, he soon experienced excruciating pain in his stomach, as if it was being ripped apart. Despite being extremely hungry, Beelzebub suddenly dragged him to a location, the same place where he had killed the Hellhound before. There, Beelzebub transformed into a needle and absorbed the blood of the dead Hellhound. Miraculously, Vikir's condition improved as soon as Beelzebub absorbed the blood. This made Vikir wonder if the forest had dried up due to the demon blade's absorption of the blood. Furthermore, Beelzebub not only absorbs the blood of the monsters but also their powers. Beelzebub has 3 slots for these abilities, and the absorption of the Hellhound's power only filled 1 slot. The Hellhound Hemorrhage is a powerful skill that can constantly drain the opponent's blood, even through the smallest of wounds. The other 2 slots are yet to be filled with Beelzebub's inherent abilities. Vikir is excited to see what other powers he will gain from Beelzebub in the future. After feeling happy about acquiring the new skills, Vikir learned that Beelzebub was known as a greedy fly with the power to absorb and turn enemy abilities into his own. This unlimited absorption capability made Beelzebub a formidable weapon. The Hellhound skill, Hellhound Hemorrhage, was especially powerful, and Vikir couldn't wait to test it out. Suddenly, Beelzebub pulled him towards the corpse of Cerberus, and after absorbing its blood, Vikir acquired the burn injury skill. But to his surprise, Beelzebub also absorbed the blood of a crushed monster named Sewer Rat, granting Vikir the high-speed generation skill. With these new abilities and the confidence that came from defeating strong monsters, Vikir was sure he could take the first place in the upcoming practice exam. With a few days still to go before the exam, Vikir decided to relax and prepare himself for the challenge ahead. A week had passed since the young hunters had set out on their assessment, and finally, they had all regrouped to be evaluated. The hunters had caught several demonic creatures, and the remains of these beasts had been transformed into weapons and jewelry, while the remaining parts were donated to the needy. However, the sight of one particular monster's corpse left the exam supervisors, including Baskerville's head, Hugo, utterly stunned. The scene shifted to Hugo, who was inquiring of his head butler, John, about the hunter who had slain the Cerberus. John informed him that it was young Master Vikir who had inadvertently wandered into the restricted area during the assessment, and ended up confronting and killing the mighty beast. It was later revealed that Cerberus had been wounded by the barbarian tribe, and Vikir had finished the creature off with a poisoned wooden spear, leaving the examiners impressed and amazed. As Hugo listened to John's account, he couldn't help but wonder where Vikir had obtained such a lethal poison and how he managed to defeat the fearsome Cerberus. John, however, was at a loss, as Vikir had returned to his dormitory after the assessment, claiming to be exhausted. He couldn't believe that someone from the Van family could be so exceptional, as it was usually the Law family that produced prodigies. But Hugo made it clear that he didn't discriminate based on family lineage, as long as someone had the talent and determination to succeed. Intrigued by this turn of events, Hugo decided to summon Vikir to his chambers. When the young hunter arrived, Hugo wasted no time in asking him about his incredible feat of slaying the monstrous Cerberus. Vikir explained to Hugo that he had placed the chocolate on a wooden spear, which was actually a deadly poison for the demonic creatures they were dealing with. Hugo was surprised and asked for an explanation, to which Vikir responded calmly. Inquisitive, Hugo asked Vikir why he had not revealed this earlier when the butler had questioned him about the Hound. Vikir responded that the butler was not his master, as he belonged to the clan. Therefore, only the clan master could command him. Hugo acknowledged Vikir's loyalty and praised him for his cleverness, promising him the monster's corpse as a reward. He went on to say that, as Vikir had scored the highest, he could ask for a wish, which Hugo would grant him. As soon as Hugo granted Vikir the opportunity to make a wish, Vikir knew exactly what he wanted. He had been waiting for this moment for what felt like an eternity, and he didn't hesitate to speak his mind. Vikir asked to be granted access to the coveted 10,000 epistle library, a top-secret collection of 10,000 books only accessible to the patriarch and second-in-command of the Baskerville clan, along with their direct descendants. Initially taken aback by Vikir's request, Hugo quickly realized the gravity of the situation and granted him permission to enter the library. Not only that, but Hugo also allowed Vikir to read the Baskerville 6th technique, which was located in the 6th restricted zone deep inside the library. Vikir was taken aback by Hugo's response. He couldn't believe that Hugo was willing to allow him, an illegitimate child with the Van middle name, to read the Baskerville 6th technique. In the past, there had never been a case where someone with his background was permitted to go past the 4th technique. During their conversation, it was revealed that Hugo's current cultivation level was the Baskerville 7th technique, and prior to Vikir's regression, Hugo had already mastered 9 of its techniques. Despite his progress, Vikir had not forgotten the discrimination he faced as an illegitimate child. He was determined to surpass Hugo in this life and achieve greatness. Vikir believed that he would be able to obtain the greatest essence of Baskerville, the textbook of swordsmanship containing the teachings of the first patriarch who had subdued the 7 great disasters. He knew that Hugo Le Baskerville would be the one to hand it over to him, as he didn't realize the true value of the book he possessed. With these thoughts in mind, Vikir took his leave. Shortly after arriving at the 10,000 epistle library, Vikir was thrilled to be there in person for the first time. He eagerly searched the vast collection, and was delighted to find many books on swordsmanship, something he had desperately wanted to learn in his past life. However, despite possessing a considerable amount of mana. As an illegitimate child of the Baskerville family, he knew he could never learn any swordsmanship techniques superior to the fourth. The Baskerville family had implemented this as a defense mechanism to ensure that their hounds, the children who become Baskervilles, never bare their teeth towards their master. Nevertheless, Vikir was elated when he found the book on the sixth technique that Hugo had mentioned. If it were before his regression, he never would have even dreamt of such an opportunity. Of course, Hugo had allowed him to have the book, assuming that an 8-year-old child wouldn't be able to memorize it all in one day. However, prior to his regression, Vikir had already learned the theory behind the first to fourth techniques until he grew tired of it. His aim had been to deduce and speculate the theory of the fifth technique. The Baskerville swordsmanship was dependent on the stage of the sword, with one tooth representing the first technique, two teeth representing the second, and so on. When one draws teeth, a special trait, a red sword energy, appears. The sixth technique didn't really interest Vikir, as he had a different reason for coming to the 10,000 Epistle Library. During his search for the desired book, he stumbled upon one called Lurking Ambush. Although it was a ripped, useless miscellaneous book to most, Vikir knew its true worth. Before his regression, when he was affiliated with the Hound Squad, he had found a strange relic in a dungeon on the border of Noir Mountain. It was a single ripped page from a swordsmanship textbook with Baskerville's handwriting on it. Hugo, who found it remarkable, scoured the entire library trying to find the book that matched the page, and that book was Lurking Ambush. In this book, where the Baskerville ancestors wrote, there is a Baskerville 10th technique mentioned. Hugo, who had become obsessed with the 10th technique, released the hounds and found the remaining 6 pages on which the technique was written. The reward for doing all that was Vikir's death. As a result, Hugo broke through the 7th technique and achieved the 9th technique, leaving behind a wasted pile of hound corpses and blood. However, the hound that managed to reclaim all those pages was Vikir, who remembered all the contents written on them. After an entire day of reading, Vikir had finally committed the contents of the book to memory from beginning to end. With his newly acquired knowledge, Vikir began practicing the techniques outlined in the book. As the scene transitioned to Vikir's subconscious, it became apparent that he had already mastered the first 4 techniques. With his focus now set on the 5th technique, Vikir visualized his target as none other than Hugo. He channeled his newfound knowledge and executed the technique flawlessly. Overcome with joy, Vikir felt like crying tears of happiness. In a moment of awe-inspiring transformation, a young hound's canine teeth began growing at an unprecedented speed in Baskerville's history, bearing towards his master. After successfully executing the 5th technique, Vikir felt confident that with enough mana, he could attain the level he had reached before his regression. He was elated to discover that his mana capacity had also increased, enabling him to achieve yet another level of mastery. As he observed the liquid aura surrounding him, a telltale sign of a graduator, he couldn't believe that he had achieved this feat at the tender age of 8. Graduators were on a completely different level from sword experts, and Vikir's solid aura had now transformed into a liquid one, with increased density that allowed for greater versatility in its use. Additionally, his swordsmanship had also greatly improved since his regression, making him a formidable opponent. Although Vikir had learned the Piercing Fang technique, he knew that its benefits were limited, even if it allowed him to progress rapidly. On the other hand, the Lurking Ambush technique was a perfect sword maneuver that could seamlessly shift between offense and defense without any growth limitations. With enough determination, Vikir believed that he could even challenge a mid-class graduator with this technique. However, to ensure that Hugo and the hounds wouldn't be able to learn the 10th technique, Vikir took out a magnifying glass and set fire to the book, destroying it completely. This would make it much harder for anyone else to attain the same level of mastery he had achieved. As the burning smell emanated from the book, the Guardian Knights arrived on the scene and questioned Vikir about what he was doing. Vikir quickly explained that he had accidentally left the magnifying glass too close to the book, causing it to catch fire. The guards were relieved to learn that it was just a useless book that had been destroyed and were grateful that Vikir was in an area where there were no valuable books. Vikir then urged the knights to keep the incident a secret, and they readily agreed. With that, Vikir left the area. The scene shifted to Hugo's room, where he was curious to learn about Vikir's recent enlightenment. He asked Vikir what he had learned in the library, and Vikir responded by describing a warm, sharp, yet soft and vicious sensation. Hugo and his butler John were shocked as they realized that Vikir was referring to the aura, a sign that he had officially entered the world of the sword. They knew that even geniuses had to train tirelessly until the age of 15 in order to achieve the level of a low-class sword expert. Intrigued by Vikir's revelation, Hugo asked him to demonstrate what he had learned, and Vikir readily agreed. The scene then shifted to an arena where Vikir was waiting for his opponent. While he waited, John asked Hugo what his plan was to test the skills of the young master Vikir. Hugo responded by saying that he planned to release a monster for Vikir to deal with. The monster was a C-rank orc, and the students who were watching the match were shocked to see such a formidable opponent for an 8-year-old. They thought it was overkill and that Vikir would need to be at least 15 years old to handle it. They were also worried that if something went wrong, the Guardian Knights would have to intervene. As Vikir and the orc faced each other, the monster was chained up. But when the chains were released, the orc became angry and hungry, causing the audience to gasp in shock. The orc monster started the match with a piercing sound and charged towards Vikir. However, in a flash, Vikir cut the orc's hand, shocking everyone in the arena. Even the orc couldn't believe what had just happened. But before it could recover, Vikir quickly sliced off its leg, causing it to collapse to the ground. The orc was surprised that its high-speed regenerative abilities weren't activating because of Vikir's hemorrhage skill. Everyone in the audience was amazed by Vikir's strength and skill. The scene was also watched by Hugo, who was impressed with what he saw. Vikir noticed Hugo's reaction and believed that he was still processing the knowledge he gained from the library. To demonstrate his prowess, Vikir infused his sword with a red aura, which shocked not only John but also everyone present. With his aura-empowered weapon, Vikir charged at the orc and effortlessly sliced it down in one swift motion. Hugo was left in shock of the display of power. John was quick to recognize the magnitude of Vikir's abilities, exclaiming that he was certain that Vikir was a low-class sword expert. He congratulated Hugo on being present to witness the birth of a genius, emphasizing that among all the families of the Empire, he didn't believe there would ever be another genius quite like Vikir. Initially shaken by the display of strength, Hugo soon calmed himself by rationalizing that the orc was a weaker opponent. However, Vikir wasn't content with just defeating a single foe and asked Hugo if there were any stronger opponents to face. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you want to see the next part of this video, please let me know by liking this video and subscribing to my channel.